So Donald Trump threatened to slap 100% tariffs on everything Canada sells to the United States just because Mark Carney dared to sign a deal that helps Canadian farmers and lower grocery bills.
This is the same guy who praised the deal a week ago. Then he watched Carney steal the spotlight in Davos and suddenly decided Canada is a drop-off port that needs to be punished.
While he's posting that Canada lives because of the United States, his own government can't control federal agents who just shot an ICU nurse in the street and then tried to spin the footage like nobody could hit replay.
And as if all of that wasn't enough, his Treasury Secretary is flirting with Alberta separatism on American talk shows, like the province is a strip mall of oil-rich real estate that they can just peel off the map and add to their collection.
So today, we're asking a simple question. When a president that chaotic threatens Canada with economic Armageddon, how seriously should we actually take him? We're going to break down what 100% tariff would actually do, why it hurts American families at least as much as it hurts Canadian ones, and why this is exactly the moment Canada has to lean into new trading partners instead of begging Washington for approval.
And we are going to talk about something that Trump really doesn't want to hear. Canada does not exist at his pleasure. We're not a side project, we're not a spare state, and we're definitely not his drop-off port.
So if you're Canadian and you're tired of being threatened every time we act in our own interest, or if you're an American who's sick of waking up to another tragedy, another shooting headline, another country full of grief instead of answers, then stick around, because this one's for you.
Let's start with the big scary phrase, 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods. It sounds like a doomsday button. In reality, it's more like threatening to double the price of your own groceries to win an argument with your neighbor.
A tariff is not a magic punishment beam that only hits Canadians. It's a tax at the border. The importer pays it, then they pass it through in higher prices. That's trucks, cars, lumber, food, manufactured parts, everything that crosses that border multiple times before it ends up in a driveway or a kitchen.
And remember how the North American manufacturing actually works. A car is not made in Canada or just made in the US. It is made in Windsor and Detroit, Oakville and Ohio, with parts crossing the border like they're commuting to work.
When Trump says 100% tariff on Canadian goods, he's really saying, let's jack up costs for American plants that rely on Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian parts, and then see how the stock market likes that.
And we already know how the market reacts when he acts like this. Every headline like this translates into uncertainty. Companies freeze investment, they delay hiring, and they put off expansion because they don't know which social media rant is going to hit them next.
And that's why serious people in finance keep calling Trump's style a risk all by itself. Not because they're delicate flowers, but because they can't plan a 5-year investment around a man who changes his mind between breakfast and lunch.
Now let's talk about the deal that triggered this latest threat out of Washington. Carney goes to Beijing. Canada agrees to let in 49,000 Chinese EVs per year at a 6.1% tariff instead of the 100% it previously had. In exchange, China eases its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola meal and a bunch of seafood products like lobster and crab, and we can't forget the peas.
Is that a massive all-in free trade agreement? No. Canada's own trade minister has been crystal clear. There is no pursuit of a full free trade deal with China. This is targeted tariff relief for both sides, designed to help farmers and exporters who were being squeezed.
And what does Trump say when he first hears about it? Well, he says, that's what Carney should do. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that.
And a week later, same deal, same facts. The only thing that changed is Carney gave a speech in Davos that the whole world noticed, saying it was presidential and inspiring. Now suddenly, Trump is ranting about Governor Carney, drop-off port, and China will eat Canada alive.
And that tells you everything. The problem isn't the content of the deal. The problem is that Carney looked like a leader on the world stage, and Trump can't stand it because he's a jealous little boy.
This is the Board of Peace guy, by the way, the club he made up so that he could fire people from it later. He invites Carney in. Carney gives one honest speech about middle powers needing to stand up to economic bullying, and boom, membership revoked. And when you follow that by threatening 100% tariffs over a deal you praised a week ago, you don't just look petty, you prove to every ally on earth that you can't be trusted as a partner.
So how should Canada react? Well, first, we don't panic. The whole point of these big numbers and capital letters is to get us flailing.
Second, we quietly keep doing what we've already started, diversifying. Deals with Europe, deals with Asia and the Middle East. Then, fixing our own internal trade restrictions so Canadian goods can move across Canada as easily as they move into the States, and we keep that boycott going. Why the heck are you still traveling to the USA, people?
And when Carney says the old order is not coming back, he's not being dramatic. He's being realistic. The era where you could assume that the US would treat allies predictably is over as long as Trump is steering the ship.
And here's the really important part. This isn't just rough on Canada. It's brutal on Americans too. Every time Trump fires off a threat at NATO, at Europe, at Canada, ordinary Americans are the ones whose factories pause hiring, whose pensions get whiplash, whose mortgages sit on top of a nervous bond market. They're becoming more and more powerless inside a system that they don't control. Allies aren't drifting away because they hate America. They're backing away from total chaos.
And that's why this has to be a joint pushback. Canadians, Europeans, and yes, Americans themselves need to stand up to Trump and to the companies and donors who keep writing the checks for his awful behavior. Because if nobody pushes back, the message to every future leader is, go ahead, threaten your allies on a whim. The people are paying the price and they'll just take it anyway.
Canada has to do the exact same thing. Not because we hate the US, but because we want a country that still functions even when the president down south decides to launch another late-night threat.
Meanwhile, while Trump is telling the world that China will destroy Canada's social fabric if we dare to trade with them, he needs to take a look at his own house. In Minnesota, federal agents carrying out his immigration crackdown shot and killed Renee Nicole Good sitting in her car. 2 weeks later, they killed an ICU nurse, Alex Preddy, in the middle of the street who was trying to protect a woman that ICE shoved to the ground.
There's video. There are multiple angles. And once again, the official version and what people can see with their own eyes do not line up. Federal officials say he was armed and posed a grave threat. Witnesses, the family, and legal experts are looking at the footage and using one word: murder.
You've even got a sitting member of Congress on camera calling ICE officers cowards and demanding prosecutions. You've got the mayor of Minneapolis telling the president to get the federal forces out of his city.
And Trump's response to all this? Double down on law and order. Suggest that anyone criticizing federal agents are weak, and then pivot back to ranting about how Canada should be grateful. It's all about distraction in the Project 2025 government of chaos.
So when he tells us that China will destroy our way of life, well, I have a question for you, Donnie. Which part of our way of life are you worried about? Is it our universal healthcare, a charter of rights, police forces that actually help the community, and don't have federal agents rolling into cities like they're an occupying army? If anything, Canadians are looking south right now and saying, oh, we're not perfect, but we're not absolutely importing that model.
And this is where the tariff threat and the Minnesota shootings actually connect. It's about power with no guardrails, economic power, police power. If you let one decide that they're the entire system, everything else starts bending around them. Canada's job is not to nod along and hope we don't get noticed. Canada's job is to build enough independence that we can say no when we have to.
And that brings us to Alberta, because ever since the Greenland land grab blew up in their faces, Trump's world has been busy trying to redraw someone else's borders again. And this time, it's with our provinces.
Trump's Treasury Secretary goes on Real America's Voice and calls Alberta a neutral partner and muses about a referendum on leaving Canada. At the same time, a Republican congressman hops on the BBC and basically says Alberta would rather be a USA state.
This is simply not true. And just to be clear, Scott Bessent was not floating this on some neutral ground. No, he went on Real America's Voice, a pro-Trump, hard-right TV and streaming channel that pumps out the same talking points as Steve Bannon.
The actual Alberta government's response? We want pipelines in every direction, thanks. And also, pretty sure Albertans don't want to become Americans. And polling backs that up. Sure, there's a frustration with Ottawa. But when you ask people if they want to join the United States, support just falls off a cliff.
Because Albertans are smart enough to know the difference between being mad at your federal government and handing your sovereignty to a guy who wants to put a flag over you, over Greenland, and Venezuela.
What Trump's allies are doing is that classic wedge politics. Find a place that feels ignored, then tell them they're special, whisper about how much a better life would be if they just broke away, promise them pipelines, markets, cheap dollars, whatever they want to hear.
But notice how it always ends? The resources are the star of the pitch. The people, they're just scenery. So what do we actually do with all of this? A U.S. president is threatening 100% tariffs. Federal agents are killing people in the street. And American officials are flirting with Alberta separatism. It's a lot to handle.
It is. So what do we have to do? Well, the worst thing that we can do is to freeze. The second worst thing we can do is start mimicking their craziness. For Canadians, step one is refusing to let Trump set our emotional thermostat. Every time that he posts, ask, is this a real policy backed by laws and timelines, or is it just another pressure tactic?
Step two is backing up the boring, grown-up work of diversification, which is exactly what the Carney government is doing. It means supporting infrastructure that gets our product to more than one coast and more than one country. And for all of us, that means buying Canadian when it matters. It means voting for parties that treat trade as a long-term plan, not just a reaction to whoever yelled the loudest at us this week.
And step three is defending our own democracy from this imported nonsense. When you see people parroting U.S. talking points about Alberta becoming the 51st state, push back with facts. When you see friends sharing clips that look like they came straight from a campaign war room, ask them who benefits. So let's end with the core argument. Trump says Canada lives because of the United States. Carney's answer was simple. Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian.
And that's the clash. Trump still talks like Canada exists as an appendix of America. Carney treats Canada like a country with its own interests, alliances, and future.
Carney is quietly building that future, cutting deals so Canadian farmers can move canola, coastal communities can sell their seafood, and our auto industry can plug into the future instead of standing in line waiting for approval.
And Trump is doing the opposite. His threats are turning the U.S. from an anchor into a punchline. Less fear, more eye rolls.
We will trade with the U.S. when it makes sense. We will stand up to the U.S. when we have to. We will build relationships with Europe, Asia, and anyone else who treats us like a partner, not a possession.
And if Trump's allies want to daydream about pipelines and referendums and folding Alberta into their empire, well, they can enjoy their fantasy because Canadians, we're going to be busy doing what we've always done when big power starts swaggering.
Yep. We'll organize, we'll vote, we'll build, we'll keep our healthcare, our passports, and our stubborn little sense of fairness.
Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada lives because we are a nation of stubborn, proud people who get up, go to work, build things, and supply the resources and ideas that the rest of the world runs on.
So here's the question for you today. When Trump threatens 100% tariffs, what do you want Canada's response to be? Fear or focus? Let us know in the comments. Are you worried about the threat, or do you think he backs down the moment Wall Street starts to sweat? Also, if you found this helpful, hit like and subscribe. And don't just keep this to yourself. Hit that share button. Send this to that one friend who still thinks that we can't stand up to the US, or anyone who needs to hear that Canada is doing just fine.
And if you want the deep dives and the documents that we can't always share here on camera, make sure you're over on Substack. But we will see you in the comments today.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay focused and stay Canadian.
Ciao for now.